Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Sorghum, also known as Milo, is an important food staple for Kansas, the United States, and even the world. Sorghum is an excellent source of energy, protein, vitamins, and minerals, and can grow in harsh environments where other crops cannot grow. In the United States, it is primarily used as poultry and cattle feed, as well as in brewing applications. Worldwide, it is widely used as a food grain for people as well. Many farmers in Kansas grow sorghum along with many other varieties of crops. Over 5 million acres of sorghum was planted in the United States in 2020. We will discuss sorghum on this episode of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Sorghum is a popular crop to grow in Kansas. It's a very versatile crop for Kansas growers as it can be grown as a grain, forage, or sweet crop. Given its drought tolerant, sorghum is primarily grown as a dryland crop and is better adapted to be grown on marginal lands than other crops. In 2018, Kansas was ranked as the top sorghum producing state. The sorghum belt extends from South Dakota through Kansas and down to southern Texas. So, is it Milo or sorghum? What is it used for, and are there different kinds of sorghum or Milo?
Milo is kind of the term that we call it. I don't know if it's more of a regional deal, but grain sorghum is what I grow. It's a hybrid, and it's used for cattle feed, blended in ethanol, and then I think here the last few years, China has been buying it to blend it into some sort of alcohol. This is the full season dry land, planted about mid-May. Same variety as what over there on the irrigated, much taller than the double crop, and about my tallest dry land. This had a rye cover crop in it, then a cover crop was terminated, pre-emergent herbicide was put down, and as you can see, there's still a good number of pigweeds. It is also sprayed over the top with the post-emergent and still didn't kill them. And as you can see, these palmer plants, they don't even put out much leaves. It's all seed. They've just been a nightmare of a weed because their main goal is to reproduce, and one plant left untreated to anything can put up 1 million seeds per plant. So you look at a whole field, that's going to make problems for next year. So this here will be cut. I'll put a cover in it probably next early spring, rye or spring triticale, and then let that grow, and I'll put soybeans into the cover, and hopefully the herbicides, and hopefully we get our dicamba tolerance back or herbicide back for the soybeans. That way it's just another tool that we can have to manage these pigweeds. But for now, it's difficult to be able to manage all these, because they'll just grow straight up until it reaches sun, and that's why I tried to go with the faster growing Milo to help canopy it, but and it's the only weed out here. There's no other weeds, just palmer. We're at my double crop Milo, irrigated. Kind of in this area where we're at, it's actually dry land, but if you look out where it's a little taller, that's the irrigated part. What that means is this was actually wheat last year. It was cut towards the end of June, and this field here was drilled the 4th of July with a early to early medium variety. And as you can see here, we're middle September, and it's headed out. And this is only my second year of doing it. I usually double crop soybeans, but I was getting nematode buildup, and I wasn't seeing the yields out of the soybeans, so trying the double crop Milo to see. Last year it got cold on us earlier than usual, so it kind of hurt the test weight, and the double crop did about 75 to 80, which is still pretty good, basically dry land, but it's a second crop, and it was sprayed down with your pre-emergence after the wheat was cut, and then fertilized pre-plant, and then drilled, and then I believe I have about 4 passes over it with the irrigation, and I even put it out on some dry land where the moisture was really good to start, so I went ahead and drilled some dry land. Dry land, it's uninsurable, so you don't have, so it's not covered by insurance, so you do take the risk there. But this year in some of those spots looks pretty good for being only rained on 2 or 3 times this year, about 1 inch each. So not a whole lot of moisture there, but yet you still get a second crop out of it. You know, since Milo is cut pretty late in the year, it's hard to get in a crop behind it. Like soybeans we would cut in September, October, and we'd have enough time to put wheat into it. Milo's a little more difficult since you're cutting it more towards the end of October, and then it also uses up a lot of nitrogen from the ground, and it's hard to go back in with wheat. So usually go from a Milo to a soybean, like this will be soybeans next year, and then after that I go into wheat after I cut the soybeans. But you can use it to fallow. It's also been really good for cattle grazing. I lease this out about every year to cattle for them to graze on the stalks after it's been cut.
Similar to corn, sorghum is a tall-growing grass, stalk plant that has tillers and branched roots. Sorghum is also quite close to corn and other cereals in its development and growth, though its seedlings are smaller than corn. Before 1940, most grain sorghum was 5 to 7 feet tall, but this created a harvesting problem. So most sorghum grown today has either 2 or 3 dwarfing genes in them to reduce their size. There are several different grain sorghum groups, though the most current grain sorghum grown is a hybrid between crossing Milo with Kafir corn. A self-fertilizing plant, sorghum can also cross-pollinate. Sorghum seed color varies from yellow, white, and reddish-brown. As a common crop grown in Kansas, many farmers grow it alongside other types of crops. But what are some common crops grown along with sorghum?
It's no question that we're a grain state, and it's just a matter of where you are in the state, your elevation, the temperatures, the water conditions, the kind of grain that you're probably going to grow. So there's a section where wheat is prominent and is a great crop for those conditions, and corn just isn't going to be a viable crop, and it's going to be way too expensive to try to grow. Whereas in northeast Kansas, you'll see a lot of corn growing, and as well as beans and other varieties. And then sorghum and millet are 2 other forms of grains that are used, not just here in Kansas, but sorghum and millet are widely used across the world for human consumption as well as animal consumption. And that's an example of several varieties of the different kinds of crops that are grown here.
Well, I think, you look over time, what's happened in the corn acreage seems to be going up, and sorghum or Milo acres have gone down a little bit. And there are probably more soybeans now too. So those acres have changed. Those crops are grown pretty much throughout the state. You get in western Kansas, you find a little bit of dry land corn, but probably better suited to Milo unless you got irrigation. If they got irrigation, they're probably going to be raising corn and soybeans. Milo's a better crop on dry land areas. So you see those being grown. From my standpoint, and I think it's an underutilized resource for the livestock industry, is the crop residues that are available on corn and Milo. Some people use those, but I think it's an underused resource that we definitely could do more so in the state. Of course, in order to do that, you may have to put a fence around it. You got to supply water. So there's some things you have to do in order to put a cow herd out there. But you'll see some states. I know Nebraska, for instance, uses their corn residue a lot more than what we tend to do in this state. Their producers, that's what they rely to put their cow herd on in the wintertime.
So 2020 sorghum acres are down a bit. Couple of reasons for that, probably. One is the sorghum industry's been working really hard at creating resistance to the sugarcane aphid. You don't have to go back very many years, and we had a tremendous infestation of sugarcane aphids in Kansas and surrounding states that had a devastating impact on the Milo crop. And so, as they've identified strains that have a higher resistance to sugarcane aphids, that's been beneficial. Just reading an article yesterday about 3 companies who are bringing some herbicide-resistant strains or traits to the marketplace in sorghum. That's new. That has not been the case. So you didn't have that herbicide resistance genetically built into the plant in sorghum like you have in corn, certainly, but even in cotton. And so that was one of the challenges, was weed control was tougher in a sorghum crop. That will become easier, become more complementary to the crops that are being planted around it. The third is the marketplace has had its ups and downs. Right now, it's a great time to be a sorghum producer. There's some very positive basis numbers in place right now for sorghum prices. I just saw some numbers yesterday, 60 to 70 cent positive basis in central Kansas for bushels of sorghum. Demand in China is obviously strong, and so they're looking and chasing limited bushels pretty hard to get them on a ship and get them sent over to China. So yeah, I think we're going to continue to see sorghum stock rise. Something we don't talk a lot about because you don't see it in grain, but has been a shining star in the sorghum industry is a sorghum silage crop. The dairies that we work with, and it's a lot of them have moved, and feedlots as well, to a sorghum silage rather than a corn silage, or as a complement to corn silage because of the feed value that it has. It's highly digestible by the animal, and it's an area that I think we're going to continue to see growth that's going to be positive for the sorghum industry.
There are many uses for sorghum in the United States. It is primarily used for livestock feed and to produce ethanol, but there are many other uses for sorghum as well. The use of sorghum as a bioenergy crop has increased dramatically in recent years, with up to 1/3 of the U.S. sorghum crop going into ethanol production. A starch source, sugar source, and cellulose source, all in a single species, sorghum can be used to produce ethanol using a multitude of platforms. Sorghum and corn are interchangeable in starch-based ethanol production. In fact, a bushel of grain sorghum produces as much ethanol as a bushel of corn. The use of sorghum in U.S. food production is growing due to its status as a gluten-free product. Sorghum is the 5th most important cereal grain crop in the world, largely because it grows well in many different environments. Only 4 other foods, rice, wheat, corn, and potatoes, are consumed in greater amounts by the human race. Used to make both leavened and unleavened breads, sorghum is also found in various fermented and unfermented beverages and can be steamed, popped, flaked, or consumed as a whole grain or syrup. For thousands of years, sorghum has been a food staple around the world. It's the dietary foundation of more than 500 million people in 30 countries and is one of the most familiar foods in the world. The value of sorghum as animal feed is similar to that of corn. The grain is higher in protein and fat, but is lower in vitamin A. Sorghum should be cracked or rolled before feeding it to cattle, as this improves it being digested. In China, sorghum is the most important ingredient for the production of many distilled beverages. In the United States, sorghum is distilled for uses in beer and vodka, among other alcoholic products. The straw from sorghum is used to make wallboard building material for houses, as well as biodegradable packaging material for sensitive electronic equipment because it does not accumulate static electricity. With all of these uses, is sorghum a profitable crop in Kansas?
It can be. I know it's more consistent than, say, a soybean or a corn crop. I don't do corn, so I mean, as far as the financials of it, I'm unsure, but Milo can come through in a drought, don't take a whole lot of water to produce it. You can, a good dry land rate, you can get anywhere from 100 to 120, but you can consistently get it in the 80s and 90s about every year. So beans might be more profitable if the conditions are right. So it's, you know, higher risk, higher reward, but Milo stays pretty consistent. Milo right now is about 70 cents a bushel more than what the corn price is. And that's where a lot of that demand from China is coming from. So although corn you might be, you know, 250s on irrigated, you know, 140, 150 on Milo on irrigated, but your inputs aren't nearly as much. Most of your input goes into fertilizer, and what's been real challenging is the herbicide with the Palmer amaranth or the pigweed. That's just been getting resistant to pretty much everything you throw at it. And you know, Milo's also not genetically modified for herbicide resistance, so you know, there's really not much over-the-top use you can use on it. And what there is not working as well either. So.
As a very versatile member of the grass family, sorghum grows best during the summers in warm climates and in sandy soils. It also withstands drought and flood conditions better than corn does. It also does well competing with weeds in narrow rows. Short periods of drought do not hamper the development of sorghum seeds because it develops its seed head over long periods of time. Short periods of water stress do not usually have the ability to prevent kernel development. Even under the most adverse weather conditions, sorghum will still produce some seed. Only rarely will sorghum farmers find a kernelless season. This may be because of sorghum's ability to hold water in its foliage better than other crops. Sorghum has a waxy coating on its leaves and stems, which helps to keep water in the plant, even in intense heat. Even though sorghum can be a very drought and flood-resistant crop, it does require some upkeep. So what maintenance is involved with growing sorghum, and what equipment is necessary to farm it?
What we started doing is I started drilling it in 10-inch spacing. I drill beans and wheat all on that spacing. You hope to get that quick canopy to choke out and suppress the weeds. So you should have less time put in to weed management by doing that. And then I can also utilize the same drill, same equipment for all three of the crops that I do. So there's less time put into there because I'm just dealing with one piece of equipment rather than multiple. You can use the planter. You know, I don't do corn, so I don't have a planter, so I didn't want to own a planter just for one crop. So I have one, I use a 40-foot air seeder to seed anywhere from, usually it goes from 3 to 3.5 pounds to the acre for about a 50,000 population, depending on seed size. Then irrigated, like out here, is 100 to 120,000 population, and that is around 7 pounds the acre. So with the 250 bushel cart, you know, you don't have a whole lot of seed in there, so you can go a long ways on a bag of seed.
Threats such as weeds and insect pests can harm sorghum crops. A proper weed and insect management program can help minimize the damage to the sorghum crop. Insects that are a threat to sorghum include billbugs, sugarcane beetles, aphids, many types of worms, grasshoppers, mites, borers, the sorghum midge, chinch bugs, stink bugs, grubs, white-fringed beetle larvae, and seed corn maggots. Insects will destroy seed and can also bore into the seedling plants below the soil surface, killing the main stem. Higher seeding rates will allow sorghum to withstand some stand loss without affecting yield. Also, different types of birds, including blackbirds, can infest grain sorghum. Birds will consume whole seed, but will also break seeds by eating portions and leaving half of the seed on the panicle. Despite these threats, there are several types of insects and spiders that commonly occur in sorghum that will help control these pests. These include ladybugs, hoverfly larvae, damsel bugs, minute pirate bugs, lacewings, ground beetles, spiders, and numerous parasitic wasps and flies. Weeds are also a threat to sorghum. Weed species such as barnyard grass, Bermuda grass, broadleaf signal grass, crabgrass, fall panicum, foxtail, Johnson grass, pigweed, Palmer amaranth, Sand burr and shattercane can be harmful to the growth of the crop. With all of these threats to sorghum, what must farmers do to protect the crop from weeds and other pests?
Haven't had to spray for this year, but years past we've had to spray for headworms that will get in the head and start eating on the seed. And then also we had one year where sugarcane aphid was so bad that if you didn't spray insecticide, that it would basically suck the juice right out of the plant and kill the plant. And so far we haven't had to deal with aphids for the past few years. They've been out there, but I think after that first year it brought in a lot of beneficial insects like the ladybug larva, and we haven't had that issue. Some of like the hybrid out here, this has a trait where from research has been more resistant to sugarcane aphids. It's been good for the last few years as far as aphids go. How to not use herbicides for weed control, but yet still maintain soil conservation. And then you have the public kind of against the GMO stuff and herbicide, glyphosate use and all that. And you know, mechanically, you know, it would have to be something that I haven't seen invented yet, something that to go out and basically pull them out by hand. Hire people to do it, but when you're doing 2,300 acres, it's hard to cover that kind of ground in an amount of time, you know, and still be profitable, of course. But like out here, this stuff's drilled in 10-inch row spacing, so that's one technique to make it closer. And I don't know, you could go to a 7.5-inch spacing to maybe get a quicker canopy, but Milo's tough because the Palmer and Milo, they kind of germinate at the same time, same growth pattern, and makes it difficult. Cover cropping, you know, is the other technique. As far as being able to, they either need to come up with a all together new herbicide that will kill it, whether it's selective or not. But I don't see that happening, and if it does, it's probably just going to get resistant to that anyway. Maybe there's, you know, something in the genetics or something that we can do as far as a herbicide type deal to make the seed sterile, so at least it wouldn't repopulate for the next year. You know, I know there's an allelopathy in cereal rye that kind of helps suppresses pigweeds, and I've kind of noticed that when the rye is green, the pigweeds does not grow as fast and as healthy. But once you spray that rye dead, I mean, it just comes right back. So I don't know if there's something that we can genetically do in our crops that has that allelopathy in it to suppress weeds. I mean, that would be amazing. Then we wouldn't need to do any kind of post-emergent spraying at all. And that would definitely save some money there.
Such practices as crop rotation, plant hybrids, fertilizer, properly timed planting, tillage or no tillage, as well as properly timed harvesting can help minimize problems with seeds and insect pests. With all the possibilities with sorghum farming, what does the future hold?
I have a 6-year-old son, and he's the 6th generation, so I ask him what he wants to do when he grows up. I ask him if he wants to farm, and he says that he wants to build the robots to do the farming so we can go play. So that's maybe that's it, you know, robots. And I can definitely see technology definitely advancing. I mean, I use soil moisture probes, I use the satellite imagery software and yield monitoring. Right now I'm kind of in a stage of just building up the data so that way that it'll be there for the future. I've done some variable rate stuff, kind of playing around with it, and you know, I mean, that stuff all does cost, so you kind of have to watch out for that and make sure you get a return on investment. But this is the first year for the soil moisture probes, and that's been really helpful. And you know, there's times where I probably would have watered that I didn't because it just didn't seem to require it. So you know, that saves some money. And then you know, I bought a drone for using it to scout anywhere from weeds to different varieties of seed, how it's progressing, and checking nozzles on the pivot. You know, when I can't see them, it's kind of nice. I can fly along there and check which nozzles are plugged. And so that's what I see in the future, is more automated type stuff, and we can just get to where we can control the weeds better. That's kind of where it's getting difficult.
Sorghum is an incredibly important crop to Kansas and the rest of the world, and should continually be a profitable crop for many farmers. Advances in sorghum crop genetics, as well as weed and pest control, can help the farmer deal with the invasive plant species as well as the insects that can harm the crop. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Real Ag on sorghum. As always, you can check out this and other episodes of Real Ag on SmokyHillsPBS.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills PBS, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.